What would you do if you were 19 homeless and completely alone with nowhere left to go? And the only place you could survive was an abandoned lighthouse by the ocean. This is the story of Grace, a girl no one noticed, no family, no home, no one waiting for her. Until one stormy night she stepped inside that lighthouse and discovered something hidden inside that was never meant to be found. Stay with me until the end, because what Grace finds inside that lighthouse might be the one thing you didn't know you needed to hear today. Don't forget to like and subscribe because stories like this can change lives. Grace was only 19, but life had already stripped her of everything most people take for granted. No family, no safety net, no one waiting for her at the end of the day. She had aged out of the foster system with a single backpack and a quiet understanding that the world wasn't going to catch her if she fell, it would simply watch. The nights came first. Cold, endless nights on hard bus station benches, pretending to sleep just to avoid being noticed. Then came the hunger, sharp, humiliating, constant. She learned how to stretch a single meal for days, how to avoid eye contact, how to disappear in plain sight. People passed her every day, but no one really saw her. And then, the storm came. The wind howled like something alive, cutting through her thin jacket as rain soaked her to the bone. Grace ran blindly along the dark coastline, desperate, shaking, on the edge of giving up until she saw it. A towering, abandoned lighthouse. Broken, isolated, forgotten, just like her. But what Grace didn't know was that stepping inside that lighthouse wouldn't just save her life. It would uncover a truth that would change everything she thought she knew about herself. Grace didn't remember deciding to go inside the lighthouse. Her body moved before her mind could catch up, driven by cold, fear, and the desperate instinct to survive. The rusted door resisted her at first. She pushed harder, her trembling hands slipping against the metal as the wind screamed behind her. Then suddenly,
Grace!
The sound tore through the storm as the door gave way. Grace stumbled inside, slamming it shut behind her as if she could lock the storm out of her life entirely. For a moment, she just stood there, chest heaving, soaked to the bone, listening. Silence. Not the comforting kind, but the heavy, suffocating silence of a place long forgotten. The air smelled of damp concrete and salt, thick with years of neglect. Every surface was coated in dust. The faint beam of light sneaking through cracked windows revealed peeling paint, broken furniture, and shadows that seemed to stretch and twist when she moved. Grace hugged herself tightly, her teeth chattering uncontrollably. "This is better than outside," she whispered, though her voice sounded small, almost swallowed by the darkness. She found a corner near the wall and slid down onto the cold floor, pulling her knees to her chest. Her wet clothes clung to her skin like ice. Every gust of wind outside rattled the structure, making the old lighthouse groan like it was alive and in pain. That first night felt endless. Every sound made her flinch. The distant crash of waves, the hollow whistle of wind forcing its way through cracks. At one point, she could have sworn she heard footsteps above her, but when she held her breath to listen, nothing followed. Still, she didn't sleep. Not really. Just brief moments of drifting in and out, interrupted by cold jolts of fear. By morning, the storm had weakened, but the gray sky offered no warmth, no hope. Grace forced herself to stand, her legs stiff and aching. "This is temporary," she told herself, "just until I figure something out." But deep down, she knew she had nowhere else to go. The day passed slowly. She explored only what she dared, keeping close to the entrance, afraid of what might be deeper inside. The spiral staircase caught her attention, winding upward into darkness like a path to somewhere unknown. She avoided it. For now, instead, she searched for anything useful: a torn blanket, a rusted lantern that no longer worked, pieces of wood she could maybe use later. It wasn't much, but it was something. As the sky darkened again, Grace felt that familiar dread creeping back into her chest. Another night, another fight to stay warm, another battle with the silence. And then, the second storm came. This one was worse. The wind slammed against the lighthouse like it was trying to tear it apart. Rain lashed the windows in violent sheets. The entire structure trembled, and suddenly, Grace didn't feel safe near the entrance anymore. "I need to move," she whispered urgently. Her eyes darted around until they landed on the spiral staircase again. For a moment, she hesitated. Every instinct told her to stay where she was, to not go deeper into a place she didn't understand. But another violent crash shook the building. Dust rained down from the ceiling. She didn't have a choice. Gripping the railing, Grace began to climb. Each step creaked beneath her weight. The higher she went, the darker it became. The air grew colder, heavier, as if the lighthouse itself was holding its breath. Halfway up, the wind howled through a broken panel, nearly knocking her off balance. She pressed herself against the wall, heart racing. Keep going," she muttered. That's when she saw it. At first, she thought it was just another shadow. But as lightning flashed through the cracks in the walls, it revealed something strange. A section of the wall behind the staircase didn't look right. The wood was different, older, rougher, and slightly uneven, like it had been placed there in a hurry. Grace froze. Her instincts screamed at her to ignore it, to keep moving, to survive the storm first. But something else, something deeper, pulled at her. Curiosity. Or maybe fate. Slowly, she stepped closer. Her fingers hovered over the surface before finally pressing against it. The wood shifted, just slightly. Her breath caught. No way. With trembling hands, she pushed harder. A dull thud echoed as the panel gave way, revealing a narrow gap just enough for her to see inside. Darkness. Complete and absolute. A cold draft slipped out, brushing against her face like a whisper from the past. Grace's heart pounded violently in her chest. Someone had hidden this. Not sealed it, not locked it. Hidden it! Which meant one thing. Whatever was inside was never meant to be found. Another crack of thunder shook the lighthouse, snapping her back to reality. She should close it, walk away, pretend she never saw it. But instead, Grace reached into the darkness, and everything was about to change. Grace's fingers trembled as they disappeared into the darkness behind the hidden panel. For a second, she almost pulled back. Every instinct told her this was a mistake, that whatever had been hidden here was buried for a reason. But then, her hand brushed against something solid. A box. Rough, wooden, cold to the touch. She swallowed hard and pulled it toward her, dragging it into the faint light spilling from the storm outside. Dust scattered into the air, making her cough as she knelt on the creaking steps. Her heart was pounding so loudly it felt like it might echo through the entire lighthouse. Okay, she whispered, more to calm herself than anything else. Slowly, she opened it. Inside, rows of cassette tapes, dozens of them, carefully arranged, despite the years. Each one labeled in faded handwriting dates, short phrases, sometimes just a single word. Day 12. Storm again. Can't sleep. Please. Grace felt a chill crawl up her spine. This wasn't random. This was deliberate, personal. Beneath the tapes, she found something else, a small, worn-out tape recorder, its surface scratched but intact, and tucked beside it. A notebook, its pages yellowed, edges curled, as if time itself had tried to erase whatever was written inside. For a long moment, Grace just stared. This wasn't just an abandoned place anymore. Someone had lived here. Someone had stayed long enough to leave pieces of themselves behind. And somehow, those pieces had been waiting. For her. Another crack of thunder shook the lighthouse, snapping her out of the trance. Her hands moved before she could overthink it. She grabbed one of the tapes. The label read, "If anyone finds this." Her breath caught. No way. With shaking fingers, she inserted the tape into the recorder. It resisted at first, the mechanism stiff from years of disuse. She pressed it harder until it clicked into place. For a moment, nothing happened. Just silence. Then, click. A low hiss filled the air. Static. Grace held her breath. And then, a voice. I don't know if anyone will ever hear this. Grace froze. The voice was deep. Tired. Heavy with something she couldn't quite name but felt instantly. But if you do, I guess that means I'm gone. The words echoed through the narrow space, wrapping around her like a presence. She didn't move, didn't breathe. This place, it gets into your head. The silence, it's not empty. It's loud, louder than anything I've ever known. Grace's eyes filled with tears before she even realized why. There was something about the way he spoke. Not dramatic, not exaggerated. Just honest, painfully honest. At first, I thought I could handle it. Just a few weeks, maybe a month. But days started blending together. Nights felt longer, and the worst part isn't the dark. A pause. Static crackled softly. It's the feeling that you don't exist to anyone anymore. Grace's hand slowly covered her mouth. Her chest tightened, because she knew that feeling too well. The tape continued. I started talking out loud just to hear a voice. My own voice. Just to remind myself I'm still here. That I haven't disappeared. A shaky breath echoed through the recording. Funny, isn't it? You spend your whole life trying to be alone, and then one day, it's all you have left. Tears slid silently down Grace's cheeks now. She didn't wipe them away. She couldn't. If you're listening to this, I hope you're not like me. I hope you still have someone. Anyone. Because if you don't, the voice cracked. Just slightly. This place will break you. The tape clicked. Silence again. But this time, it wasn't empty. It was heavy, suffocating, alive. Grace stared at the recorder, her hands trembling uncontrollably. That voice. It didn't feel like it belonged to the past. It felt close, too close. Like the man had been sitting right there, just moments ago. Her eyes slowly shifted toward the dark opening behind the wall. For the first time since entering the lighthouse, Grace felt something she couldn't explain. Not just fear, not just sadness, but a question, a pull. Who was he? What happened to him? And why did his words feel like they were meant specifically for her? The storm outside roared louder, as if demanding to be heard, but Grace didn't move. Instead, she reached for another tape, then another, each one labeled, each one waiting. A story, a life, a voice that refused to disappear, and somehow, without realizing it, Grace had just stepped into it. Not as a visitor, but as the next chapter. Grace didn't realize when she started crying. At first, it was just a sting in her eyes, a tightness in her chest, the kind she had learned to ignore because crying never changed anything. But this time, it didn't stop. The tears came quietly at first, slipping down her face as the tape continued to play. Then suddenly, uncontrollably, her whole body began to shake, because every word, I felt like it was meant for her. It's the feeling that you don't exist to anyone anymore. That line echoed in her mind long after the tape had ended. Grace pressed her hand against her chest, as if trying to steady something breaking inside. "I know that feeling," she whispered, her voice barely audible. For years, she had carried that exact thought buried deep, never spoken out loud. The nights in the foster homes where no one remembered her birthday. The social workers who changed every few months. The quiet understanding that she was just temporary, replaceable, invisible. And yet, someone else had felt it too. Someone who had stood in this very place, breathing the same cold air, listening to the same hollow silence. She wasn't alone. Not really. Her trembling fingers reached for another tape, then another. She didn't even check the labels anymore. She just needed to hear him again. Needed to feel that strange, painful comfort. Click. Day 27. I tried to leave today. Grace froze. I made it to the door, had my hand on it, but I couldn't do it, because out there, it's not better, it's just louder, more people, but the same emptiness. Her breath hitched. That was exactly how she had felt sitting in crowded places, surrounded by people, yet completely alone. At least here, the silence tells the truth. Grace slowly shook her head, tears falling faster now. "No," she whispered. "No, it doesn't have to stay like that." But even as she said it, she wasn't sure if she believed it. The tape crackled softly before continuing. "If anyone ever finds this, I hope you don't stay. I hope you're stronger than me." The words hit her like a blow. Stronger. Grace let out a shaky breath. Her whole life, she had felt weak, left behind, like someone life just happened to. But now, sitting here, holding on to the voice of someone who had completely given up, something inside her shifted, not all at once, not dramatically, but enough to make her question something she had never questioned before. What if she didn't have to end up the same way? The thought scared her, because it meant responsibility. It meant choosing something different even when everything inside her wanted to give up. Grace wiped her face with the sleeve of her damp jacket, trying to steady her breathing. She looked around the small hidden room again, but this time, it didn't feel suffocating. It felt important, like every object in here mattered, every tape, every word, every silence between them. This wasn't just a place someone had died in. This was a place someone had tried to be heard, and somehow, Grace was the one hearing it. Her gaze slowly lifted toward the narrow opening in the wall, then beyond it to the rest of the lighthouse. For the first time since she arrived, she didn't feel like she was hiding here. She felt like she had been led here. The idea was strange, almost impossible, but she couldn't ignore it. Out of all the places in the world, out of all the nights she could have ended up somewhere else, she had found this, these tapes, this voice, a story that mirrored her own so closely it felt like fate had stitched their lives together across time. Grace reached for the recorder again, her hands steadier now. Not because she wasn't afraid, but because the fear had changed. It wasn't about the darkness anymore. It was about what would happen if she turned away from this. If she walked out and pretended none of this existed, another tape slid into place. Click. I don't want to be forgotten. Grace closed her eyes tightly. "You won't be," she whispered. And for the first time in a long time, she meant it, because something inside her had already begun to change. The lighthouse was no longer just a shelter from the storm. It wasn't just a place to survive the night. It had become something else entirely. A connection. A voice reaching through time. A reminder that even in the deepest isolation, someone, somewhere, had felt the same pain and had tried to leave something behind. And now, Grace understood something she never had before. Being invisible didn't mean she didn't matter. It just meant no one had listened yet. But she was listening now. And maybe, just maybe, that was where everything began to change. Grace didn't leave. That was the first decision she had ever made entirely for herself. Not because she had nowhere else to go, though that was still true, but because, for the first time, she felt like leaving would mean losing something important, something fragile, something meant for her. The storm had passed by morning, leaving behind a heavy silence and a sky washed in pale gray. Light slipped through the cracked windows of the lighthouse. Faint, but enough. Enough to begin. Grace stood in the center of the room, looking around slowly. Dust, broken wood, shadows that once felt threatening, now just felt empty. "This place," she whispered softly. "It doesn't have to stay like this." Her voice echoed faintly, but it didn't scare her anymore. It grounded her. So she started small. She found an old piece of cloth torn, stiff with age, and began wiping down the nearest surface. Dust lifted into the air with every movement, making her cough, her eyes watering. But she didn't stop, because every inch she cleaned felt like reclaiming something. Not just the space, but herself. Hours passed, then more. Grace worked with a quiet determination she didn't recognize. She gathered broken pieces into piles, cleared pathways through the clutter, and opened what windows she could to let the ocean air push back against the stale, suffocating smell. Her hands became scratched. Her muscles ached. But something inside her, something deeper, felt lighter, as if, with every layer of dust she wiped away, she was peeling back years of pain she had never faced. By the time the sun dipped low, casting a faint golden glow across the horizon, the lighthouse looked different. Not fixed, not whole, but alive. Grace stood still, breathing slowly, taking it in. Then her eyes shifted toward the hidden room, the tapes, the voice. She walked back toward it, this time without hesitation, without fear. She picked up the recorder and sat down on the floor, pulling her knees close just like the night before. But this time, she wasn't trying to survive the darkness. She was choosing to sit with it. Click. The tape began to play. Day 34. I didn't think I'd make it this far. Grace closed her eyes. The voice felt familiar now, not distant, not haunting, human. I keep telling myself I'll leave tomorrow, but tomorrow comes and I'm still here. She let out a quiet breath. I stayed too, she whispered. The words surprised her, because for once, staying didn't feel like failure. It felt like strength. Night after night, Grace listened. Some recordings were calm, reflective. Others were broken, filled with long silences, shaky breaths, moments where the man couldn't even finish his thoughts. And with each one, Grace began to understand something she never had before. Pain didn't disappear just because you ignored it. It stayed. It waited. And if you never faced it, it consumed you. She saw it in his voice, the slow unraveling, the loneliness turning into something heavier, darker. And for the first time in her life, Grace chose a different path. Instead of running from the memories that hurt her, she began to sit with them. She remembered the nights in foster homes where she cried herself to sleep quietly, so no one would hear. The birthdays that passed unnoticed. The feeling of being temporary in every place she had ever been. It hurt. God, it hurt more than anything. But she didn't turn away, because now she understood. Facing it was the only way out. Days turned into a rhythm. Clean, fix, listen, breathe. Grace found pieces of herself in the process. She repaired a small lamp she discovered in a storage corner, its light flickering weakly at first, then steady, and when it finally stayed on, she smiled. Not a forced smile, not one to hide the pain, a real one, because it meant something. It meant she could bring light into a place that had been dark for years. Just like, maybe, she could do the same for herself. One evening, as the sky burned orange over the ocean, Grace sat by the window, holding one of the tapes in her hand. She didn't press play right away. Instead, she stared out at the horizon, her thoughts quieter than they had ever been. "This place didn't break me," she said softly. Her voice was steady now. "It found me." And for the first time in her life, Grace wasn't just surviving anymore. She was building something. A space. A purpose. A reason to stay. The lighthouse, once abandoned and forgotten, was no longer just a shelter. It had become a beginning. A chance. A new opportunity. Not given to her, but created by her. Grace didn't notice when the lighthouse stopped feeling temporary. It happened quietly, in the way she no longer flinched at every sound, in the way her footsteps became familiar against the wooden floors, in the way the silence no longer felt empty. It felt full of something she couldn't name at first, but slowly began to understand. Presence. Not of something supernatural, but of something left behind, and something still growing. Days turned into weeks. The lighthouse changed, and so did she. Grace woke up with purpose now, not urgency, not fear, but intention. She fixed what she could, learned what she didn't know, and built routines out of nothing. Morning light meant cleaning and repairs. Afternoons meant exploring deeper parts of the structure she had once been too afraid to touch. And nights were for the tapes. But one night, as something changed, Grace reached for a tape she hadn't noticed before. It was buried beneath the others. Its label almost completely faded. Only 2 words remained legible. "Don't listen." Her fingers froze. A strange unease crept up her spine. "That's new," she whispered. For a moment, she considered putting it back. Every instinct told her to leave it alone. But curiosity, the same force that led her to the hidden room, pulled her forward again. Slowly, she inserted the tape. Click. Static. Louder than usual. Then, a voice. But this time, it was different. "If you found this, you shouldn't be here." Grace's breath caught instantly. The tone wasn't tired. It wasn't reflective. It was urgent. Sharp. I made a mistake. The tape crackled violently, like it was struggling to keep the recording alive. "I thought the silence was the worst part. It's not." Grace leaned in, her heart beginning to race. "It's what comes after you start listening." Her fingers tightened around the edge of the recorder. "What does that mean?" she whispered. The voice continued, lower now, almost like he didn't want to be heard. "The more I talked, the more it felt like something was listening back." Grace's stomach dropped. A loud bang echoed somewhere in the lighthouse. She flinched, her head snapping toward the door. Just the wind. It had to be the wind. But suddenly, The silence didn't feel the same anymore. The tape went on. I started hearing things. Not outside, not in the walls. A pause. Inside the recordings. Grace shook her head slightly, panic rising in her chest. No, that's not possible. But her eyes stayed locked on the recorder. Voices that weren't mine. Breathing when I wasn't speaking. Pauses that felt wrong. The static grew louder. If you're listening to this, you need to stop. Don't make the same mistake I did. Don't keep digging. The voice broke at the end, not with sadness, but fear. Real fear. Then, click. Silence. Heavy. Unmoving. Grace didn't breathe. Didn't move. Her mind raced, trying to make sense of what she had just heard. "It's just stress," she said quickly. "He was alone too long. That's all this is." But even as she said it, something didn't feel right. Slowly, she reached for another tape, her hands shaking now. She pressed play. Click. Day 41. I heard it again. Grace's heart skipped. Not outside, inside the tape. Her chest tightened. No. The voice on the recording sounded more unstable now. I rewound it 3 times. It's there. It's not me. A faint sound crackled beneath his voice. So faint, Grace almost missed it. But then, she heard it. A second voice. Barely audible. A whisper. Not synced with the man speaking. Not part of the original recording. Grace's eyes widened in terror. No way. She slammed the stop button. The room fell silent again. But now, that silence felt different. Not empty. Not calm. Watching? Grace slowly looked around the hidden room. Her breath shallow. For weeks, she had believed this place was helping her heal, helping her grow. And it had. She was stronger now, clearer, more grounded. But this was something else. Something deeper. Something the man in the recordings had tried to warn her about. And yet, even now, even with fear creeping back into her bones, Grace didn't step away. Because beneath the fear, there was something stronger. The same thing that had kept her alive this whole time. The need to understand. The need to know. And the quiet, dangerous thought that had begun to form in her mind. What if the truth inside these tapes was the reason she was meant to find this place? Grace slowly reached for the recorder again. Her hand steadier than before. Not because she wasn't afraid, but because she had changed. She wasn't the same girl who ran from the storm anymore. Now, she was walking straight into it. Grace didn't sleep that night. Not because of the cold, not because of the storm, but because of the truth. It lingered in the air, heavy and impossible to ignore. The whispers in the tapes, the warning, the fear in the man's voice. And yet, she didn't run. She couldn't, because for the first time in her life, Grace understood something deeper than fear. Running had never saved her. It had only kept her lost. The lighthouse stood silent around her, the faint glow of the small lamp casting long shadows against the walls. The same walls that once felt suffocating, now felt like they were waiting for her to decide. Grace sat in the hidden room, the recorder resting in her lap. Her fingers traced its edges slowly, thoughtfully. "I hear you," she whispered into the quiet. Her voice didn't shake this time. "I hear all of it." For a moment, nothing happened. Just silence. But this time, she didn't fear it. She accepted it. Because she finally understood. The man in the recordings hadn't been destroyed by the lighthouse. He had been destroyed by his own isolation, by the belief that no one would ever listen, that his voice would disappear into nothing. Grace closed her eyes, her chest rising and falling slowly. "I won't let that happen." The words were soft, but they carried something stronger than anything she had felt before. Purpose. She stood up slowly, holding the recorder tightly in her hands. Then, with a quiet determination, she walked out of the hidden room and into the main space of the lighthouse. The wind outside had calmed. The ocean, once violent, now moved in slow, steady waves beneath the rising light of dawn. Grace climbed the spiral staircase, not with fear, but with intention. Step by step, higher and higher, until she reached the top. The glass windows of the lighthouse were cracked, clouded with years of neglect, but as the first light of morning broke through, it painted everything in gold. Grace stepped forward, looking out at the endless horizon. For so long, she had felt like she was standing at the edge of the world. Now, it felt like she was standing at the beginning of it. She set the recorder down in front of her, took a deep breath, and pressed record. For a moment, she didn't speak. Her reflection stared back at her in the glass, tired, scarred, but still standing. Still here. Then finally, "Hi." Her voice was quiet, but real. "My name is Grace." She swallowed, her throat tightening, but she didn't stop. "I don't know who you are, or when you'll hear this." Her eyes drifted toward the ocean. "But if you found this, then maybe you feel like I did." A tear slipped down her cheek, but this time, she smiled through it. "Like you don't matter, like no one sees you." She paused, then shook her head gently. "But you're wrong." Her voice grew stronger. "Because I'm here and I'm listening." The wind moved softly through the broken glass, carrying her words out into the open air. "You're not invisible. You're not forgotten." Her hand rested over her heart. "I know what it feels like to be alone, to think there's no way out." A breath. "But there is." She looked straight ahead now, eyes clear, steady, even if it starts in the darkest place you've ever been. The recorder continued to capture every word, every truth, every piece of her that she had once been too afraid to face. Behind her, the lighthouse stood no longer abandoned, no longer silent, alive, not because it had changed, but because she had. Grace reached forward and gently stopped the recording. For a moment, she just stood there, holding on to the stillness. Not empty, not heavy, but full. Full of everything she had survived, everything she had faced, everything she had become. As the sun rose higher, its light filled the lighthouse completely, chasing away every shadow that once lived there. Grace took a slow breath, and for the first time in her life, she didn't feel like she was searching for a place to belong. She had created one. Not perfect, not easy, but real. And as she looked out at the endless horizon, one quiet truth settled deep in her heart. Sometimes, the place that breaks you is the same place that rebuilds you into someone stronger than you ever imagined. The lighthouse, once abandoned and forgotten, now stood illuminated again, its light cutting through the vast darkness of the ocean. But it wasn't just guiding ships anymore. It was guiding something far more fragile. Lost souls. People like her. Grace stood at the top, watching as the beam rotated slowly, sweeping across the waves like a quiet promise you are not alone. For years, this place had been silent, empty, a witness to someone else's pain that had gone unheard, unanswered. But not anymore, because now there was a voice, her voice, and it didn't end with that one recording. Days later, Grace found herself sitting beside the recorder again, but this time she wasn't shaking, she wasn't afraid. She pressed record, not because she needed to survive, but because she had something to give. "If you're hearing this," she began softly, "then you made it here for a reason." Her words were steadier now, warmer. "I used to think this place was the end, that it was where people came when they had nowhere left to go." She looked around the lighthouse, the cleaned floors, the soft light, the space that now felt alive. But I was wrong. A small, genuine smile touched her lips. "This isn't the end." She paused. "It's a second chance." The wind outside carried her voice beyond the walls, beyond the cliffs into the unknown. Grace began organizing the tapes, carefully labeling them, preserving both the man's recording and her own. A story, no longer broken, but continued, and slowly something unexpected happened. One evening, as the sun dipped low, painting the sky in shades of gold and fire, Grace noticed something in the distance. A small boat, drifting closer to the shore. At first, she thought nothing of it, just another passing vessel. But it didn't pass. It slowed, then stopped. Her heart skipped. She watched as a figure stepped onto the rocky edge below, shielding their eyes as they looked up toward the lighthouse. Toward the light. Toward her. Grace's breath caught. For a moment, fear flickered inside her. Old instincts, old habits. Run, hide, disappear. But they didn't take over, because she wasn't that girl anymore. Instead, Grace turned, walked down the spiral stairs, and toward the door she once feared opening. Her hand rested on it briefly. Then, she pulled it open. The wind rushed in, carrying the scent of salt and something new. Possibility. The figure below hesitated, then called out, "Hello." A voice. Real. Alive. Grace stepped forward into the fading light. "I'm here," she answered. And for the first time, she wasn't invisible. The lighthouse stood behind her, glowing stronger than ever. Not just as a beacon in the night, but as proof that even the most forgotten places and the most forgotten people can become something powerful, something seen, something that matters. And as the light continued to turn, steady and unwavering, one truth remained. Some lights aren't meant to guide ships. They're meant to guide people back to themselves. Grace's story is not just about survival. It's about transformation. There comes a moment in life when everything familiar is stripped away, when the people you hoped would stay are gone, when the world feels cold, distant, and indifferent. In those moments, it's easy to believe the lie that you don't matter, that you've been forgotten. But the truth is, being unseen doesn't mean being unimportant. Sometimes, life takes everything away not to break you, but to bring you to a place where you can finally hear yourself, where you can confront the pain you've buried, the fears you've avoided, and the story you've been too afraid to tell. Grace didn't find hope because someone saved her. She found it because she chose to stay, to listen, and to face the darkness instead of running from it. And in doing so, she became something she never thought possible. Not a victim of her past, but a light for others, because sometimes the deepest darkness doesn't exist to destroy you. It exists to show you that you were capable of becoming the light all along.